Hey, good evening, everybody. Welcome to day 18 of this vlog series. The title of today's video is going to be 2020 was a scam. So I got that title. It's a little later than I've typically been recording these, but right as I was getting ready to record an episode on YouTube of Alex Jones on the Michael Malice podcast went live, and I really like both of those guys. I think Alex Jones gets a bit of a bad rap. I think he's maybe, provocative and eccentric and silly sometimes. So I think people try and really paint him into a corner and paint him as a bad guy. But I'm entertained by him, and I also am impressed by the amount of knowledge he has just stored in his brain. So you can't help but respect someone who can just pull historical facts out of the back of their brain like nobody's business. So anyhow, one line that stuck out to me in this interview was, Alex Jones said one thing that he was happy about after this last year was, he said, hey, everything about 2020 was a scam, and it kind of really pushed a lot of people into a corner and put some stress and some pressure on them, to the point that he thinks it woke a lot of people up to the just kind of the weirdness, I guess, that goes on in the system that we're all living within. And so I that line really, boom, resonated with me. Just the simple fact of, hey, 2020 was a scam. And so I figured, hey, I just want to go on record. Again, the date is July 7th of 2021. I just want to go on record, as we're still winding down from all the silliness that we went through last year, and put my opinion and thoughts and everything down, on video for posterity, so that, I can look back and say, hey, this was how I felt from the beginning, and this is how I felt after it was all over. Because I will not be surprised if there is some kind of revisionist history of all the events we went through. I mean, depending on what the near and long-term future holds, people looking back on this time and painting it in a certain light, whatever that is. So the three, I guess, main points that I jotted down before hitting record were as follows. So the first note is lockdowns, the second note is masks, and the third note is loss of civility. So first and foremost, I actually remember very distinctly the start of the Corona scare and kind of what was going on, because we were working at the time. We had DMC up and running, and I remember we started to hear about this kind of, it was, January, February, you started to hear about this flu bug that came from China. And I remember kind of one of the first big things that happened was that Trump closed down travel from China to the United States. And I remember not being a fan of that move necessarily. I remember thinking that it was a slippery slope, that, hey, if we start to take actions like this, really extreme actions where we're, shutting down intercontinental travel, where does it end? And so I remember being, very, very skeptical of this initial move. And then as there was a bit of a swell of, hey, this scare and this hysteria and this fear is kind of ramping up, and it's, it's the waters are getting rockier and rockier. One specific conversation that jumps out at me was one with a member of our DMC team who doesn't any longer work with us. He wasn't a guy who was necessarily there for that long, but I remember really having a strong resistance towards the idea of what was coming down the pike. It started to feel, hey, there's going to be these different controls that are going to start to clamp down, and these different actions that are going to be taken. And I did not like the sound of any of this. And one point that I remember thinking at that time, because the individual I was talking to was kind of like, in support of, oh, hey, this is not such a bad thing. And I remember saying something along the lines of, well, I don't think they need to do any of this, but they're going to do it. And on the backside of it, we will never be able to say whether it was the right or wrong move. And by that, I meant if we had held steady and said, hey, the system is what it is, life is dangerous as it is, et cetera, but we can't go around dictating and tyrannizing the people of our society, so nature's going to take its course, there would have been a body count, right? The route that we went, actions were taken, limitations were imposed, all this, all of what happened, and then there's a body count. Well, we never got to experience that first eventuality where we did nothing, so there's no control to the study, right? So you can never compare the body counts to go, hey, well, if we had done nothing, this is what factually happened. Not for what some people will say, oh, well, the graphs show what, however many bodies. I'm not arguing that point. I'm saying factually, had we done nothing, there would have been a body count. The reality that we lived, there is whatever the body count is, but you can't have both, so you can never compare it. And my point at the time was, we'll go through these actions, and then on the backside of it, people will always be able to justify the actions that were taken. They'll go, well, the result we came up with was way better than what would have happened. Is it? Is it really? So, I mean, I obviously feel like it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth it by a long shot. It wasn't even close to worth it. But it happened. And so I just wanted to point out three kind of main staples of what our society turned into last year. And hopefully maybe I'll get off this topic eventually. It's one of those periods of times that it makes a strong impression. It shifts your paradigm, and it's hard to forget. It's hard to just kind of go, oh, great, oh, rejoice, we're back to normal. No, we're not back to normal. So I figured, hey, again, I haven't been on this super hard lately, but I heard that sound bite, and I figured, let me just put it on the record on my different thoughts. Okay, so first, on the lockdowns, again, this one seemed really simple to me. It seemed super unnecessary to arbitrarily lock down some businesses and not lock down others. And I know there's a million different arguments that flew around and justifications for it, but I remember one of the visuals that I saw that indicated to me that, hey, none of this is lining up, is the state had come down and had announced these business closures. And I mean, man, it's weird to even think back the fact that we were all sort of, there was just this notification that was coming out, oh, the governor is going to give some update on the coronavirus, and people were tuning in, hey, and tuning in to hear what was going to be dictated to us. What were we going to be allowed to do? How were our lives going to be manipulated by this idiot in Olympia? And I mean, Jay Inslee, I hate to even say his name, is an absolute moron. That guy is dumb. And so the fact that this moron is going to somehow be able to tell 7 million, whatever, however many residents of Washington State, what they can and can't do, where they can and can't go, how they can travel. I mean, it was even to the point where they were deeming some businesses essential and some businesses non-essential. And, our business continued to run, whether it was essential or not, whatever. That terminology makes my skin crawl. But it was even to the point where people were starting to ask, well, hey, do we need to ride around with like paperwork to say that we're essential? I mean, and that's insane to think that we'd be in a society where you get pulled. Hey, let's see your papers. Are you essential? It was upside down world that we were living in. We lived through upside down world for a year plus, like a year and a half, and we're just maybe coming right side up. But I'm really uneasy. I'm what is the shell shocked and kind of going, I don't know, are we going to be fully out of this, or is this the calm before another storm? So all that being said, my one indicator early on where I was like, these lockdowns don't make any sense, was the was the fact that you had this publishing of some businesses that had to be closed. But then I remember one of these weeks, when this was all first, and then the dates of, hey, the businesses are closed, et cetera, et cetera. So you had all these businesses shuttered. And then you drive down the street and there was a literal, and I remember a literal backed up line out of the parking lot and then into the main street of Lake City Way in Seattle of backed up cars in line for Starbucks. And it was like a visual. And I remember seeing that and going, okay. And this was at the time that, it was early on. So people didn't know how the virus was transmitted. I mean, I think since then it seems like a lot of the indication is, hey, that it's small aerosolized droplets, right? So it's a very airborne. It's not, I'm no scientist, but the three ways, right, is the fomites, right? So things can physically be on surfaces, and then you can kind of come in contact with them, and then by getting it on your person in your mucous membrane, that's how you can contract, or in that's how you can introduce certain pathogens into your system, right? So that's one way. And then there's the large aerosolized droplets when you cough, sneeze, those kind of big physical droplets. And then the third being the small aerosolized. And those are the ones that just are microscopic and float in the air. So it seems like the gauge is pointing towards it's mainly spreads through the small aerosol. But who even cares? My point being, at the time, many people did not know how it was transmitted, and yet so at the time I was thinking, okay, so you're telling me this mom and pop coffee store down the street has to shutter its doors, and yet Starbucks is allowed to have a barista literally handing out thousands of cups of coffee a day. Well, boom, that didn't compute. It's arbitrary, doesn't make any sense. And there was a lot of that. There was a lot of arbitrariness, and to think the government was trying to say, you can't leave your home. Okay, you can go for a walk. I remember I got yeah. So it was, in my main issue with the lockdowns was, let's say worst case scenario, you have this virus, this pathogen that's out there, and people are dropping like flies. Well, why does the government need to shut down a business or a restaurant or anything along those lines? My stance from the beginning, and continues to be, patronizing a business is a voluntary act. So if there's a restaurant's open and I make my evaluation as a human being that, hey, I'm aware of the risks, just like if I go outside I could get hit by a car, if I drive to the restaurant I could get in a car accident, I could get mugged. There's inherent danger in being a human being, and that if I calculate that risk and I go, hey, it's worth it to me, I'm assuming as an adult human being, I'm assuming responsibility for myself and deciding it's worth it to go out and grab a bite to eat, to go sit down at a restaurant, to keep the livelihood of the restaurant open. And that's something that I'm willing to do. I'm willing to take on that risk. Or hey, I don't think it's that risky. I'm willing to do it. So in that act, I would not be putting anyone else at risk involuntarily, right? If the employees, if the owners, or if the employees of the restaurants show up, they are obviously showing up because in a voluntary manner as well. They have decided, hey, we are going to assume the risk. We're going to go to work. We're going to earn a living despite whatever risk anyone may say is out there, or whatever it is. It's a voluntary act. They're showing up voluntarily. So you have two consenting adults show up to an establishment, have a voluntary exchange, putting no one else at risk who does not want to partake in that. No one is being forced to go to the restaurant. So I mean, again, if you're assuming this kind of mass contagious spreader, again, no one would come in contact with these people if they didn't want to. You would have to. No one's forcing anyone against their will to show up to that restaurant to be in any part of that exchange. And furthermore, if I go to the restaurant, I come in contact with a bunch of people, and then I go home. At any point along that route, I would never have to come. No one would ever have to come into contact with me involuntarily. So at the end of the day, it didn't make any sense to limit people's freedom of mobility and freedom to keep their businesses open. And one, just a sort of a separate theme that I saw people rely on was, people who were pro lockdown was, wow, keep them closed because it's in the best interest, but hey, the government should be funding these businesses to keep them open, which is just the most absurd and disconnected line of thinking humanly possible. And it's obviously coming from people who don't run a business, right? And so it's like a little bit more complicated, not complicated than that, but it's just the government doesn't have any money. And so this would get down a whole different rabbit hole, kind of an economics thing, right? But the government only has the money that it taxes from us, and based on, the government takes resources from us, and it's a portion of productive resources that we create. Well, if you stop people from working, you start to limit the amount of resources available. So it's not just something you can make up out of thin air and hey, let's give these people money. So again, it never made any sense to me. Why would we go around arbitrarily? Hey, you're essential, you can stay open. Hey, you're not essential, you have to close. And if you're open, we're going to send L&I after you. We're going to send the Department of Health after you. The liquor board, pull your business. I mean, all of these things, to where it was a full blown strong arm shutdown by the government. And I remember, one of these press conferences with our idiot governor. And there was a couple of businesses who openly were, like a restaurant or whatever. Hey, we don't have a choice. We got to save our livelihood. We're going to stay open, and getting absurd fines daily of $9,000 a day or whatever it was, just absurd fines. And the governor was asked about it during one of these despicable Zoom press conferences, where again they would have these people calling in, they'd get to ask a question, and and there was no interaction. It was totally just contributed to this idea of this unaccountable, arbitrary, tyrannical office raining down on the peasants. That it's you get your one over the phone, and again it was all so perfect because you could theatrically hide behind this veil of this health virus scare, to where, oh, we have to do these things remotely, et cetera, which is super convenient for not being held accountable at all. You can just keep everyone's at an arm's distance, and you never have to answer any hard questions or be accountable to the people. So yeah, so then the governor was asked this, and then just with the most despicable grin on his face, something, well, I guess he couldn't see it because he was probably wearing his dumb mask while he was in a room by himself, was saying, well, we will get compliance. We will get compliance, from this business that's defying, basically saying, we're just going to we're continue to lean on this small blue collar business owner until we break him. And who cares? It was you could just tell it was no skin off his back, no skin off his back, sitting there in the governor's mansion, coming to work at wherever they go to work down there in Olympia, with not a care in the world, no repercussions to him whatsoever. A government bureaucrat, completely unaccountable to the people and completely unaffected by the decisions that he himself is making. So I could go on and on about the lockdowns all day. I guess the main point was that they were arbitrary. They didn't make any sense. You're limiting people from voluntary actions that would not have harmed anyone, that was not voluntarily a part of it, and so could not have more of a visceral attitude towards these lockdowns. The second one that I listed was masks. I've already gone 20 something minutes, so I'll keep these last two pretty short. For me, the masks, I guess, maybe were cute the first day or two, but I obviously lost patience with them very quickly, and the religion that started to pop up around the masks, and how people acted as if it was their binky, and it was somehow a virtue signal mixed with a invincibility shield mixed with the invisibility cloak, which never stood to logic or to reason, and was totally fed up with the mass right off the bat, and went through the trouble of actually digging into the quote unquote science and actually reading in on some of these studies. And a lot of the studies that the CDC had cited on their website was some of these mechanical tests of different mask materials, where they'd take, they would have this setup, and they would shoot particles at a mask, and then gauge how much of it kind of went through or got filtered out. And so a lot of the information that was posted on these, it never to me built this cohesive or this unequivocal, what is it, kind of consensus was the word from this Rogan, recent Rogan podcast, where he's had some scientists talking about some different points that are being illuminated now that we're in the year and a half mark. But there was no coherent, kind of satisfying amount of evidence that was there to support this theory of the mass. Because again, the idea that, hey, if I put the mass there and then I'm shooting stuff through it to see how much particles get through, it's like, well, what about the gaps on the sides of the mask and by my nose and under my chin? And it just seemed silly. It just seemed like counter to common sense. Again, if these things are spread in different ways, and if it's along the path that now that we're a year out from it, it's saying, okay, yeah, it spreads in these ways. Or there was a period of time, or for a long time, it's been put out there as, yeah, it's very possible that this is a big portion of the way it's spread, with the small aerosolized transmission, which means it's airborne, it's aerosolized, it's microscopic particles. I just can't fathom the thought that a dirty cloth that you're pulling in and out of your pocket and touching, I mean, even the touching part of it, but just the actual mechanical function of it would do anything for you. And I don't think anyone cared to actually question the narrative, which that to me was pretty unfortunate because again, anyone who was saying, "Oh, trust the science," or this or that, like no one ever bothered to think about it critically. They would just say, "Well, hey, a statement from the American Association of Doctors or a statement from the CDC or the WHO." And I mean, I guess if you're convinced by that, hey, these institutions have published their guidance. Hey, this is our recommendation. If you're convinced by that, I guess so be it. But to me, it never seemed like people who were so into it had really given it any critical thought or had really questioned it to any degree. And I think what a lot of people, again, I got in a lot of these little arguments and whatnot. What a lot of people fell back to is kind of just the, oh well, what could it hurt, right? Oh, it's just a what's the big deal if people just don't want to wear it? They're just being sore losers. Um, and so I think that was what people would ultimately, once they realized they had no leg to stand on and there was nothing, they hadn't gone through the motions and stress tested their beliefs to bother backing it up with anything substantial. So when you'd really get down to it, when you'd really question and kind of peel back and expose that they really did, they weren't supporting their beliefs about this particular subject with anything worthwhile, they would fall back to, well, what's the big deal? And to me, that's not a satisfying place to land, especially on something that became such a big deal, which will kind of lead into the next topic. But to me, if it's going to be made into such a big deal where people are getting harassed over it in the streets, where businesses are being fined for not complying, and so on down the list, it's like you better be sure that this works, right? It's like, for all those things to be true, getting harassed in the street, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it would be like, you know, someone waving a loaded gun around. That's a moment where you go, yeah, that, if someone's waving a loaded gun around in the street, that person deserves to be put down, or they are not allowed to be in a business if they're doing that. And so obviously, and I actually, it's funny, I saw that analogy in a recent other social media post that I made, where someone basically made the analogy, hey, not wearing a mask is like pointing at, shooting you, or I can just go around shooting people and not having consequences. So that's obviously how people felt about it. But there's just so many inconsistencies with that logic for that to be true. Again, you would have to know that someone had a bullet in the chamber, or it had a gun to begin with, and isn't just waving around their hand. And to have a gun would be the analogy of actually having the Rona to be able to spread it around. And that's why, again, just these convenient little uh, uh, crutches would come in to save people's arguments, to where then the narrative was, well, it can be an asymptomatic transmission, so now we don't know who's sick and who's not. It can be so. Again, the mask thing was particularly silly to me. I got in many altercations and had the police called on us probably multiple times, but once in particular, we were actually talking to a cop or a sheriff because we had refused to wear a mask and write it. So I mean, just completely silly stuff like that. And there was times where I would do a cost benefit and go, hey, I'm flying with my wife and she's going to just wear the mask. Let's do our trip. And so, I think if I had maybe more time on my hands, I would go through the trouble of having gotten exemptions and then just really never worn one. So if I could do it over again, I'd probably do that. But I just didn't like wearing them. Didn't see any point to it. Having dug into the information myself, was not convinced that there was any value to it whatsoever. So that just leads right into my last point, which was the most unfortunate outcome of 2020 was a complete loss of civility, and a matter of a year, having gone from just living in an idyllic society, might be the word that I'm looking for. But no, life was great. I mean, couldn't have been happier. just enjoying running a business, being in a long-term relationship, living in a beautiful city, all these things. And, you know, this just exposed some, you know, unfortunate, or just, I think it just ultimately pitted people against each other. You ended up with people on different sides of the ideological spectrum, and a lot of these things were very visible, right? And so that the mask one in particular is very obvious. Who were, you had your mask Nazis and then your anti-maskers, and then it was very easy to visually know, hey, this person's on my team, this person's not on my team, which that was never the case before. You never just walk down the street and know, oh, these people I agree with on, basic, fundamental life things, and these people I don't, just by taking one look at them. Well, I guess maybe sometime. Well, no, not necessarily. I was actually surprised this year by someone who the book, the cover of the book would have made me think that they landed on one end of the spectrum. And once we got to talking, I went, wow, you and I are pretty aligned on most things. So, but I think the unfortunate part was the loss of civility. People were no longer afraid to just go up and accost people that were complete strangers, or people that they didn't know, make snide comments, refuse service. I mean, just some of the most disgusting behavior I've ever witnessed in my short life happened in this last year, and I think that was unfortunate, and I think that's part of that kind of that men or that comment I made near the start, which was some of these things. It's kind of like that you don't forget, you don't unsee these things, right? The way I was treated at the gym. Oh, I'm doing my workout, whatever, and I'm totally obnoxious about the mask. It's around my chin. I'm not wearing it, whatever. And one of the employees who's not even on the clock, he's just there working out as a customer at that time, not on the clock, coming up and harassing me multiple times. Hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. And so it's like, now I see that guy around, right? And the mask things aren't a problem. But I'm sure he felt like he was completely right. Hey, I'm just doing my job, et cetera, et cetera. But regardless, that was never in one point I just always wish I could have made to this individual was, okay, let me accept what you're saying. Because in the way he would come at it, it was not from a place of anything beyond, hey, this is the rules, this is the guidance we've been giving. Okay, we're at a 24-hour fitness. The rules are to put weights back, or the rules are to wipe down your machines. How many times in your career as an employee of 24-hour fitness have you ever gone around and accosted someone for not following those rules, right? For not putting their weights back, or for not wiping down a machine. I mean, if it's not zero, I would imagine that it's, if there was ever a time where you witness someone not putting weights back, you might go, hey, don't worry about it this time, but I'm going to put this back. So there's many, many rules. And that was the point I had always hoped to make to people is, hey, I understand these rules exist, and you're part of a system that, maybe your mentality is, well, hey, I just want our gym to stay open. If we follow the rules, maybe we can stay open, which I think is the wrong mindset. But I could understand if you had that you might feel somewhat of a responsibility to enforce the rules. So again, I can see how people would logically get there, but you still get a decision on how you enforce the rules, or when you decide to enforce them, or to what degree and with what passion you're going to enforce them. Hey man, I gotta say this. It's a boss's guidance. Gotta come over here and ask you to put up your mask. But hey, or yeah. So I, or again, many, not many. I know, for instance, the gun store, the ammo shop. There's one up in Linwood, and they had a sign right on the door. Hey, our business is required to have a sign that says X, Y, and Z by the government. This is our sign. If you don't like these rules and these signs, call the governor's office and let them know what you think. And there was another sign, hey, we have to require you to wear a mask, but if you're not wearing one, we're going to assume you have a health condition, and we're not going to ask you about your health condition. Right? So there's a way that you can get around the rules. And so I just thought that a lot of the the loss of civility over the last year was highly unfortunate, and that just went to show and prove a point that Milton Friedman made way back when, that I picked up on this last year, which was every time you have to take action through political means, that puts a stress on the social fabric of society, right? Because the free market gives everyone choice, it gives everyone freedom, and ultimately, so how does he put it? He says you can have not uniformity. Okay, I can't remember that part of the expression right now, but he said, you put a strain on the social fabric through political means, because again, in a free market, right, in the grocery store, if I want, almond milk and you want whole milk, well, both of our desires could be met. The market will deliver those. But anytime through politics, if we have to make a decision, hey, we only can produce one kind of milk, and we have to decide whether it's going to be almond milk or whole milk. And there's a vote, 51% say, hey, it's going to be whole milk. Now, all the almond milk people, you lose. You just don't get what you want. And so that's what happened with this last year. Rather than letting people in creative and voluntary ways arrange themselves throughout society, the government stepped in and said, hey, everyone's only going to drink whole milk all year. And all the almond milk people were like, this is whack. And one last point on the lockdowns. Again, what you saw early on before the government got involved is you saw some beautiful, creative things start to take place. Before it was ever a mandate, Costco implemented a mask policy. That's great. Because now, if I want to go patronize Costco voluntarily, I'll put on a mask. But if I don't want to put on a mask, I'll go to a different business down the street that's not going to require me to. So now, what the free market would develop would be the people who want to go and only shop places that require masks because they feel more safe. They can go to those businesses, and the people who don't want to wear masks because they hate the idea of it, they can go shop where it's not required. And then you might have a bunch of people in the middle who don't really care one way or the other, and they'll be patronizing both, and it'll be a voluntary arrangement. And another thing that I saw was, I think it was PCC had designated shopping hours, and a bunch of places did. They said, hey, this is something that affects old immunocompromised individuals, et cetera, so we're going to make these shopping hours limited capacity and only for senior citizens. Great. So, now again, we all get to win, because in the evenings and the peak times, we can still have all our normal people, have a full store, do our thing and be gone. But then on those off hours, we can designate it, and now we have the old people, hey, spread out, et cetera, but then you get the government come down and say, 25% capacity or whatever it was, and then what you end up with is, in peak shopping hours, a freaking line outside of Whole Foods backed up around the corner like it's, the hottest club in the city at that time. So that was just another point on the absurdity of lockdowns, is you can have it both ways. You can have it both ways. You just got to keep the government out of it. So, wow. I was hoping to keep this maybe short. I don't know why I expected that would be the case, because once I get going on lockdowns and masks and the loss of civility, and especially in the city of Seattle, but I'm assuming all over the place, looks like I can go for 40 minutes. So anyhow, I appreciate anyone who's tuned in to any of this vlog series, and I hope you're all having a great day. Again, with some of this stuff, I'm not trying to be a downer. I'm not trying to only bring negativity to the world. And I've actually, maybe been contemplating, how can I maybe bring more of a positive spin to whatever I talk about or some of the content, because I definitely don't want to be a drain on people's energy. I don't want to just be someone that people tune in and listen to, and then they just get fired up and angry about the injustices of the world or all these things. So I think I need to really contemplate that and go, how can I, again, address some of these things, but also just bring like a positive message. Like, part of what's in my head is, I'm a big Gary Vee guy. And I think, what would he think of this, right? Like, I don't want to be a guy that's just putting out just complaints and negativity and all that. So because I think, and again, this has got me questioning myself, but I like to think that generally I'm a pretty easygoing, pretty positive outlook, pretty glass half full kind of a guy. So I would hate to be painted into a corner of just again feeling like all I have to do is just kind of spew out sort of provocative or um, negative things, but maybe to justify my actions a little bit, it's just getting a little bit of frustration off my chest after the year that we've had, and also after, and maybe just at least in the area that I've been in, where it's there not a whole lot of people agreed with that, right? It was like it was a minority of people who felt this way, and so maybe at least hoping that by putting these things out there somewhere to watch this that agreed with me, they would maybe feel a sense of relief and go, wow, okay, this is articulating things that I felt the whole time. Hey man, I agree with you too. And there's a sense of relief to go, okay, hey, I'm not alone, or I'm not the only person who thought this way. So all that being said, I'll wrap it up. Day 18, we're keeping it rolling. Coming up on 3 weeks into this, so very interested to see how this project develops. And again, appreciate any and all support of the channel and of this project. So that being said, hope you all have a great evening, and I will see you tomorrow. Thanks.